Hello from Detroit. Once again, I'm Brad.
I'm Kayanne.
And I think we've got an important topic today.
I agree.
We hear a lot about fake news, but now we're going to bring the fakeness into influencer world and talk about fake views. See what I did there?
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
Your
Wow.
mind's blown, right? So, okay, let's start with this. I think it's pretty intuitive what fake views and what fake, just fake views, right? Or fake impressions are. But why does that matter? I guess give us the overview of what the heck is going on here.
Yeah, so a lot of brands, one of their primary concerns about getting into influencer marketing is, if not, okay, the influencer is going to say something crazy, it's how do I know that this person is legit? Like, how do I know that their followers aren't just bought? How do I know that these views aren't just bought? And especially with the changes in the platforms, mainly we're going to be talking about Instagram and YouTube today, where their algorithms, they're now more algorithm based and less focused on just like time of posting. Mm-hmm. That has led a lot of smaller influencers and influencers generally to adopt these practices. So we're going to dive into sort of, first off, what the problems are on these platforms. How are people gaming the system and creating these fake views and fake engagements and things like that. And then a little bit later, going to dive into what you should be doing about it and how you should be avoiding it.
Yeah, so we want to start maybe understanding a little bit more about what the problem is specifically. And my understanding of this is that there's really truly fake views, and then there's views that are technically real views, but they're not necessarily the right views.
Right. So there's definitely black areas and gray areas. And I mean, the worst of the worst being there are straight up fake influencers on Instagram. We've all seen those sort of like publicity stunts by different agencies, or I think there was a really good one about a really good social campaign about alcoholism a couple of years ago where the entire influencer was just invented.
Right. Almost catfishing an entire audience of people.
Yeah, which is actually honestly impressive. But anyway, so that's the one extreme. But what we're more concerned about are influencers who use bots to appear more popular. So a lot of the times people who are between 1,000 followers and 100,000 followers will, buy followers, things like that, buy comments, whatnot. But then in a slightly more gray area, there are influencers who have things called comment pods, where there'll be like a group of 30 influencers, and they are all kind of committed to gaming the system together to try to promote each other's content by commenting on it at specific times and trying to get into the Explore and just trying to game the algorithm generally. Or there's also agencies and influencer networks out there who will kind of do artificial promotion amongst their influencer networks where they'll promise a brand you'll get 10 million likes on this content, and then in order to achieve that, they'll have influencers cross-promote each other. But the issue with that is that the whole point of influencer marketing is you're gaining access to a very specific, relevant audience. And when you do that and you bring in a totally unrelated influencer who, has a lot of people following them who are going to go look at that post, but they're no longer the right people. So,
right. The whole magic elixir, if you will, of influencer marketing is that you're able to tap into a group that is trusted, you're able to tap into a group that trusts a specific person, right? That trusts that influencer, which is the whole reason why paid views for influencer marketing is always a bad idea. If as a quick aside, right? If I have an influencer who gets 100,000, if influencer A gets 100,000 views per video average, influencer B gets 100,000 per average, you don't want to say, oh, well, I can pay to have influencer A get 200,000 views and it's the same. Like, no, it's absolutely not the same, because you're missing out on that second 100,000 views of having people really care about what someone says. So we see that a lot about like a view isn't a view isn't a view,
Right.
which is what we're seeing here as well. And I think it's really interesting, the whole pod model that you said, is that there are people and professionals in the industry that really encourage the cross promotion. And organic cross promotion is a really, really good thing because it helps influencers become bigger, and especially if we're both, say, fishing channels,
Right.
like people would be interested in both. But doing it for the sake of hitting a view guarantee or a certain mark for a particular video is a little bit dangerous, and in fact, very dangerous for these organizations to be doing, because you're not getting the true full benefit of that influencer. So that's really interesting. I honestly have worked in the industry a long time and was not aware of this until fairly recently. So I think that's something that a lot of people are not aware of. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think it is more prevalent on Instagram than YouTube for sure, because YouTube is actually a lot better at kind of policing this behavior, just because it's been so central to their platform for so long. So they're a little bit better, but we should talk more about how you can actually tell that this is happening and what you can do about it.
Yeah. Now there's a public-facing way you can. Well, it depends on each platform, right?
Right.
So where do we want to start? Instagram, YouTube.
Let's start with YouTube. So I think there are a couple different elements, and we've had some experience directly with influencers in trying to figure out, how can you tell if somebody's buying views? And a lot of it is, part of it is the timing of the views. I know it's if they come in random spikes, basically that don't make a ton of sense, which is pretty intuitive, and that is actually visible to the public. So that's an easy basic check that you can look into. But also just another basic check, are the comments related to the content? Because if they're just vague, positive, short comments for the most part, and the ratio is off from views to comments to followers, that's something to look out for. As well as, generally if they have, an obscene number of views and not a ton of subscribers or people who are regularly checking out their content, that's a red flag as well.
Right. So it takes some digging, but I think a lot of it is just common sense there.
Yeah.
Like Kayan said, there's some ways that you can go and click on more and look at the timing of the views, assuming that the influencer hasn't blocked you from being able to see that in the public. And frankly, there's really no reason to block that unless you're doing something nefarious. So if it's a channel that you're feeling a little bit shaky about, or you see views that don't match other channels of that same size, it's probably going to be a little bit fishy. But if you can go in and look at the timing of when the views occurred, then you're going to see, like, if you see a big spike and then nothing, it's probably bought. What it should look like is a half of a bell curve, right? You kind of have the peak at the beginning, and then it levels out in terms of the views per unit of time. So okay, so that's YouTube, right?
And then with Instagram, there are certain guidelines that we follow where if you're working with an influencer who has 1,000 followers or less, their like rate will probably be around 8%, whereas Instagram influencers who are between 1,000 and 100,000 will probably have a little bit lower of a like rate. Yeah, so, and another big thing that we look at is the follower growth rate and the patterns of growth amongst their following. So, if somebody is gaining 10,000 followers in a day and the next day, back down another 7,000, like that's a huge sign that those are probably not real. So a lot of this can take pretty close monitoring. And so I guess we can move into a couple things that we think that you should be doing to avoid fraud on these channels.
Yeah, and one thing just to jump in as a recommendation and a tie into the last section is if you're uncertain about a channel, and this probably pertains mostly to YouTube, you can always ask the influencer to get a screenshot of their sources of traffic. While this isn't available to the public, the influencer themselves will see where the traffic that watched the video came from. And a lot of this will be recommendations from YouTube, right? Or other, it was in a playlist, whatever the case may be, there'll be a lot of organic sources of traffic. And then if it's paid views, it will almost always be a direct source or unknown. So if there's a really natural way the views are spread out across view sources, that's probably authentic and appropriate, versus it's all direct link and unknown. It's highly likely that is not going to be actual views. So that's one thing that you can do in terms of watching out.
Of course, we don't recommend that you go in guns blazing to every single influencer interaction and say, like, can you show me screenshots of your back end traffic? But if you have reason to believe that maybe this influencer is participating in fraud, then yeah, it's absolutely an option. And a couple other things that we recommend just generally, especially if you're going to use micro-influencers, just be really human about developing your relationships with them. Work hard to grow those relationships and engage with them over long periods of time, and also write it into your contract that this person shouldn't be buying views or buying followers or anything like that, just as a baseline. And then decide what sort of ratio of, do a little bit of research and decide what ratio of likes and engagements to followers and the change over time in their following and things like that that you're comfortable with, and set those guidelines for yourself so that when you're monitoring your influencer work and when those changes are happening, you sort of have a line in the sand drawn where you kind of draw that red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to sound a little bit self-serving as well. So full disclosure, it is in some ways, but it's also very true, which is a lot of brands will also work with an agency because an agency lives and breathes in this world, and they're going to be able to suss out what is a real view, what's not. We have that in our contract with most of the brands that we work with, probably all the brands that we work with, just to that, hey, when we're including views, that those views are authentic and real. So there's a lot of things that you can do in order to try to make sure that you're on top of things. Whew, we learned a lot today. Anything else we need to add here, Kayan?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
We're good.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in as always. I'm Brad, still.
Kayan.
Goodbye from Detroit.